Raiders week is here, Miami Dolphins fans. We're finally entering a game where we can say we won the game before that. Nice to go into a week following a win, and we are finally here. And it's crazy because if you look at this upcoming stretch of games for our Miami Dolphins, I know a lot of us, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We know how this season has gone. You can't look at this upcoming schedule and not think that there's an opportunity to really ride this streak at least a couple of more weeks. Maybe even enter that Thanksgiving game against the Green Bay Packers with an opportunity. If you win that game, you are now 500 and potentially, like I said, let's hamper our expectations at this point in time. But you enter that game with an opportunity to potentially be 500 following that game. Because as you know, we are 3-6. And these next two opponents, the game that we're going to talk about today, home against the Raiders, home against the Patriots, very winnable games. We're going to dive into all the action with the Raiders here in just a second. Before we jump in, though, as you can see going on the scroll, the next video, we are going to do the final preview and prediction video with a guest. We had Mitchell Renz of the Raider Report on last year. Guy does a great job covering the Raiders. We want to bring him back. So definitely get subscribed if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned and get set for that video as well. Let's kick things off with some recent roster news and updates over the last couple of days, because linebacker Tyrel Dodson, who was released by the Seattle Seahawks, was claimed by the Miami Dolphins on Tuesday. Now, at the time of his release, a little bit of a shocker for the Seahawks and Seahawks fans. He actually led their team in tackles. If you think back to the game where we played the Seahawks, he was actually one of the guys that hurt Skylar Thompson with the sack that he had. And I think he has another sack on the season as well. Statistically, he was playing pretty well. However, he was cut by the Seahawks. If you follow what their beat writers and fans are all saying, a lot of people are saying, you know what, the scheme changed a little bit. He's not really a scheme fit for what they want to do right now. You read between the lines a little bit on some of that stuff. I was told that there may have been some issues with the coaching staff in Seattle. Not going to get too much deeper into that since I don't have all the details. However, let's add a little context because that release does sound a little bit fishy. That all happened on Tuesday. And then Wednesday afternoon, I'm recording this Wednesday night, we learned that David Long officially released by the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, he had gotten his starter snaps taken away by Anthony Walker. So you're likely looking at Jordan Brooks, Anthony Walker, who's been playing pretty good recently. He had the interception after that tip pass by Calais Campbell, and then the newly acquired Tyrel Dodson at linebacker for the remainder of this season. Obviously, we got Duke Riley and Tyndall behind those guys. But moving on, unfortunately, right tackle Austin Jackson has been lost for the season. He was placed on IR. The team initially thought that he could avoid surgery, end up returning yet this year after sitting out a couple of weeks, had surgery on that knee, so that ended up not being the case. We will now turn to either Kendall Lamm or Patrick Paul at right tackle. It was Kendall Lamm last week. He obviously filled in against the game against the Rams. Mike McDaniel was asked about the idea of Patrick Paul potentially getting those snaps. He didn't outright rule it out either. He said, you know what, that's a spot that's Kendall Lamm's, but it is up for competition. So depending on how Patrick Paul practices, maybe that's an opportunity where we see the rookie already here in a little bit more extensive action in week one. The problem is it's over on the right side. All of his probably pretty much off-season reps were coming from left tackle, all of his collegiate snaps essentially being at left tackle as well. So we will see how that goes. A couple of other quick roster notes before we take our first dive into the injury report of the week. Tight end Tanner Conner, a lot of tight end news. Tanner Conner placed on IR. Hayden Rucci, a familiar name from this offseason, was signed back to the team's practice squad. I know a lot of fans are happy about that. And then Jack Stoll was added off of waivers, so he will be on the roster as well after the Eagles released him earlier this week. I'm going to get that off the screen real quick, and we will take a quick dive into this injury report because Mike McDaniel has announced, unfortunately, cornerback Kendall Lamm likely going to miss this game against the Raiders with the concussion that he suffered on Monday night against the Rams. So we're expecting once again, who's filled in there? It's been Cam Smith. Expect more of that again this week. Robert Jones on the interior offensive line, been starting basically all year at left guard, being considered day-to-day following the injury he had on Monday night as well. He was held out of Wednesday's practice, but quite honestly, Wednesday's practice wasn't like a real practice. So the injury report that you're seeing on the scroll is what the team would have done with those players had there been in actual practice, but he's being considered day to day right now. But the Miami Dolphins, we did get a little bit of good news, but just take it for what it is at this point in time. Dolphins did open the practice window for Isaiah Wynn, who also, based on the practice report, would have been a limited participant. So that'll be something to monitor because right now, bodies on that offensive line are at a premium, obviously. We just talked about Austin Jackson going on IR. Now we got Robert Jones being hurt. Liam Eichenberg is Liam Eichenberg. I know he hasn't been as much of a liability this year, but he got handled a few times in that game against the Rams. So definitely something for us to keep our eye on the interior. Let's dive into this Raiders game, though, because the Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce did announce Gardner Minshew would be starting at quarterback as the Raiders do come out of their bye week for this one. It's been Minshew, it's been Aiden O'Connell, Desmond Ridder. All those guys have appeared at quarterback at one point so far for the Raiders this season. Now, none of them have really fared all that well, but Minshew is at least probably the most proven out of all of those options. I've actually said in the past when we've been looking for a backup quarterback that I wouldn't mind a guy like Gardner Minshew. He's a guy that if your quarterback gets hurt during the game, he's a perfect fill-in to kind of spark that team. Maybe fill in for a game or two and be that spark. That's what he's proven to be able to do throughout his NFL career. The problem is that's kind of where you draw the line with Gardner Minshew. Anytime he's been given the extensive action, it's kind of proven to be too much. And unfortunately for the Raiders, that's where they are with him right now. But if we look at what they've been doing running the ball this year, let's just say it's been an outright challenge for this Raiders team. Alexander Mattison leads the team with just 301 rushing yards, coming at 3 yards per carry. Zamir White, who had some hope here coming into this offseason as well, he cannot get it going either. He's averaging less than 3 yards per carry. He's at 2.9. As a team, you can't do worse than this. They are dead last in the NFL, 76.9 rushing yards per game. Now, we just kept Kyren Williams, James Cook, two teams that can run the ball better. Those are clearly better running backs. We held them relatively in check over the last 2 weeks. We honestly should not have an issue with this Raiders rushing attack. Now, obviously, we can't overlook it, but it would be a huge disappointment if all of a sudden they just started gashing us on the ground. We've actually worked our way up to 12th in the entire NFL in rushing yards allowed per game. So theoretically, if we hold the Raiders to kind of what they've been averaging and we keep stepping up our run game, we could realistically be in the top 10 against the run after this week's game against the Raiders. Receiving wise, we all know the Raiders traded away arguably their best player on the offensive side of the ball, Devontae Adams, to our division rival, the Jets, which has essentially left them with Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker as their top wide receivers. They are not striking fear into really any NFL secondary, let alone our secondary that features Jaylen Ramsey. Even if we're without Kendall Fuller, I'm not struck in by fear when it comes to Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker. The pass catcher that needs to be on defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver's radar is rookie tight end Brock Bowers. And honestly, I think back to draft day about Brock Bowers. I loved Brock Bowers as a tight end prospect. I was absolutely floored. I was shocked when the Raiders took him. Now, I like best player available. I get that. But when you think back to the Raiders, just the year before, they took Michael Mayer, another tight end, with the first pick, I believe it was, in the second round that year. So just a little bit head scratching for a team that had quite a few needs. Like I said, I get best player available, but let's have a little bit of a mix there. Regardless, you could make an argument that Brock Bowers is already one of the top tight ends in the NFL. The problem is that he doesn't really have a complement right now. There's really no one else on this offense that strikes fear. So you can steer a lot of your attention, a lot of your defensive game plan towards him, which the fact that he leads all NFL tight ends in receiving yards, that makes that all that more impressive that defensive coordinators can focus on Brock Bowers. And here he is leading all NFL tight ends. That includes Travis Kelce. That includes Mark Andrews. I know he's been hurt. That includes all of these guys, all of these good tight ends in the league. Brock Bowers leads all of the NFL tight ends in receiving yards. So I say all that, but at the same time, I say that if you're going to tell me that the top thing to take away from an imposing team in their offense is a rookie tight end, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. One random stat regarding the Raiders offense before we flip over to their defense and our offense. The Raiders are allowing 3.3 sacks per game, 29th worst in the NFL. So yeah, if Chop Robinson can get home for his third consecutive game, if Anthony Weaver can continue to strategically dial up these blitzes at a perfect time, we should be in line for another multi-sack game here defensively. Let's look at that Raiders defense, our offense. Dolphins fans, can we finally hit 30 points in a game this season? Man, we made it look so easy last year, and we're realizing that last year's offense was pretty damn special. I thought we had a good shot of accomplishing this feat the last 2 weeks against the Cardinals, against the Rams. We obviously fell short. But now, once again, we face a defense that is struggling to keep points off the board. Raiders are 30th in the NFL. Points allowed per game, nearly 28. They're right almost at that 30 mark, which is a little bit crazy considering they rank 15th in total yards allowed per game, 11th in passing yards allowed per game. That's pretty solid. 22nd in rushing yards allowed per game. That is definitely something that I'm going to try to get to the bottom of when we have Mitchell on for that next video. But much like Brock Bowers is the player that you key in on the Raiders offense, Max Crosby is that player and then some that you key in when you're considering them on the defensive side of the ball. 6.5 sacks, 11 tackles for a loss. He finally missed a game this year. He never misses games. So he's played 8 games and still has 6.5 sacks. The stats don't even begin to tell the full story when it comes to a guy like Max Crosby. He can line up on either side of the line of scrimmage. He can be a complete menace with speed, with power, with stunts, what he does in the run game as well. He is the complete package when it comes to edge rushers. He's just kind of camouflaged by the league because he plays for the Raiders, a team that's kind of struggled recently. So that brings up probably my top matchup to watch this week, as we'll likely see Teron Armstead against Matt Crosby, and then whether it's Patrick Paul or Kendall Lamm, they're going to get a heavy dose of Max Crosby. They are going to do everything possible to keep Crosby off of Tua Tagovailoa. We know that we need to keep him clean. I do expect the Raiders to keep their safeties back, try to take away the explosive plays that Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle can produce, but that's basically been every team's philosophy this year. And as you know, as a Dolphins fan, it's worked pretty well. So I'm really looking to see how Mike McDaniel, how do you combat this? Because at some point, we got to get those two rolling. We need to get some big plays. I know that we like the idea of sustaining drives. This offense clicks when we have a 2 or a 3 play drive, though, right? Like, that's when this offense is at its best, when it's at its most explosive. So if we're going to be serious about being contenders moving forward, about being relevant moving forward, Mike McDaniel has to combat that somehow. Also curious to see, when we're talking about the pass game, Jonnu Smith, is he going to continue to be involved, continue to produce in the receiving game the way he has, the last 3 or so games? Is he going to continue to get look at his snap situation. I think he only had 22 snaps last week, but the stats that he put up with that is pretty damn impressive. And then if you look at the snap distribution of our wide receivers, obviously Tyreek and Jaylen Waddle get the bulk of them, but you got Odell Beckham and Malik Washington. They both got equal amount of snaps last week against the Rams, 18 and 17 in that game. So are we going to see more of that moving forward? So snap distribution is something I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on in this game. In the ground game, there, once again, how are the snaps distributed? Last week, we saw Raheem Mostert get 0 carries. But what happened? Our rushing attack struggled. 67 yards, just 3.03 yards per carry. Now, we do have to factor in the fact that Alec Ingold, Austin Jackson, neither of them played in that game. Robert Jones got hurt in that game. But I want to see if last week was enough of a punishment. Was that enough of a punishment for Raheem Mostert for fumbling a couple times in big spots over the last few weeks? Or are we in line for a more permanent shift of touches moving forward? Obviously, Devon Achane has been dominating the touches this year, but then we saw Jalen Wright get more carries last week as well. I personally don't think we're going to see Raheem Mostert shut out on carries again this week, but as always, like I said, that's kind of the theme of the offense right now. I really want to see that distribution of touches here moving forward with the offense. Dolphins fans, like I said, I am going to wrap it there for today, but if you haven't gotten subscribed yet, definitely do so. We're going to be back. I think me and Mitch are recording, what did we say, Friday? So that video will be out at some point, either Friday or early on Saturday. So definitely get subscribed. Don't miss that one. Like I said, Dolphins fans will wrap it from there. But until next time, fins up.